Everybody get their popcorn.
And broadcasting.
I want to just say a couple of things about this piece first.
And we should also. Yeah, maybe you can sort of rearrange. Can you encircle the speakers?
It's very undemocratic of me, but it is a video piece after all, so we have to sit theaters destroying the round table.
Yeah. Both tables in the actual center that way.
Careful, the middle thing is that.
Yeah. Okay, once you take it.
And by the fiscal bonds and
Yeah.
the Lord of Schwab still life within the table.
I just wanted to make one, we just barely touched on politics at the end there. And there was just one thing I wanted to say about politics. It's something I just heard yesterday. I was listening to a documentary about the novel Lolita. Does everyone know Lolita, that book?
Sorry, which one?
Lolita, it's called. It's written, I think, 1950s, 40s or 50s by a Russian writer, Nabokov. And it's a book that that was banned in a lot of countries because it's about kind of a touchy subject. It's about a 50-year-old man who has who's in love with a 12-year-old girl and enters a sexual relationship with her. But it's an extremely good book because it's about. If you read it, it's not about that. I mean, that's what the words are on the pages. But if you think about the book and understand it, you realize it's not about pedophilia. The 50-year-old man is Europe, and the 12-year-old girl is America. So it's a book about one thing, but it's really about something completely different. So really a profound, important piece of literature for the 20th century. In Canada, they tried to ban the book. And there was a lot of debate and discussion about this book. And what eventually happened was that they decided not to ban the book because the artistic merit of the book was such that even though the subject matter was disagreeable to Canadian law, the artistic merit was more important than not offending people. Very recently, this law that was passed at that time, which basically said that if you can prove something's artistic merit, then we can never ban it as pornography. That law has been under debate now, and I can't remember if it's already, or I didn't hear, it was a news documentary that I was listening to that was just released, I think a week or two ago. So it's very, very, very recent, really, it's going on right now. But either they already changed the law or they were trying to pass the law. And what it was now was that artistic merit could no longer be used as an argument. What was put forth as an alternative was economic merit. So in other words, So in other words, they were saying, okay, we'll deem something non-offensive and allowable if it contributes in some way to the economic well-being. And artistic merit is no longer the overriding. Of course, artistic merit will always. I mean, isn't that a shocking thing that's being discussed in politics?
That's really shocking.
I mean, even just the idea that somebody stood up in Parliament and said, well, we should get rid of this artistic merit argument, economic merit. That's what's important. But this is the atmosphere in Canada politically right now, and it's not. I don't think not very different from the atmosphere politically.
So
The weird thing here is that I'm not really.
Sorry.
That means they can't ban pornography.
Well, I think that's part of it because there is a lot of there's a lot of weird stuff going on pornographically in obviously America, but in Canada as well. There's
There's a lot of money in
Yeah, it's economically, of course, very
Very
important.
viable.
There was a huge scandal about 4 years ago that a member of parliament rushed through a bunch of residence permits for a large group of Romanian girls. And he kind of, tried to rush it through and hush-hush, nobody knows about it. And what it was they were being imported for prostitution and pornography. And what they found out afterwards was he wasn't doing it for a kind of economic benefit. He was being blackmailed by the Hells Angels, who were running the prostitution ring. And they said, if you don't do this for us, we're going to kill your family off one by one. Really weird, though, that a politician would choose to go that path instead of a different path of going to the RCMP, and that kind of really shocked me at that time. But yeah, it's really hard to understand. I have this discussion all the time with Dutch people. It's hard to understand the United States or Canada when you grew up in Holland. Try to explain things to people, and it's really hard. But unless you've lived there for a while, I think you have, right? You lived in Montreal for a while, but Montreal's not really
3 years.
a bastion of.
Well,
it's
actually, what is
difficult to
interesting at the moment in Montreal is like how long the students have been striking.
The student strike
Right.
is outrageous, but that's a big tradition in Quebec, in French Canada.
Yeah, but I mean, the whole development is really interesting. They've been on strike for about 6 months now.
Yeah.
At some point, the Quebec president decided to get rid of it. I mean, and not just protesting, blocking the whole center of Montreal, masses of people. And then the Quebec president decided to ban protests or forbid
Yeah.
protests.
It's-
But
yeah.
more
Way
people
to
on the
solve
street
things,
was-
right?
It's shock doctrine, right? You've got this sociological theory of this really grew out of Katrina and New Orleans and stuff like that. Something really shocking happens, and nobody's really paying attention, so the government pushes through all these things that are just outrageous, but because everyone's confused and shocked, they accept it. Right? And that's what was going on in Montreal too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Naomi Klein. I mean, it was around before she kind of formalized it in the book.
Most recent thing that happened was they had elections in Quebec. The Quebec National Party won, and then someone got shot like outside
Oh, yeah.
the theater where they were celebrating.
Yeah. Well, it's a really weird thing. We're going off topic
Yeah,
now.
we're going-
But really weird things happened in my lifetime with the whole subject of French separatism. For instance, arms deals, arms transfers that were happening in the French part of Canada that you think, why is this going on in French Canada? And there were all kinds of really shady political motivations behind that. But Canada, I love going around the world and saying I'm Canadian because everyone's like, oh, we love Canadians. And I'm like, not if you knew us. Sorry. I'm embarrassing myself in front of 7 billion people.
Rising and rising.
Yeah.
But just spotted Chris Martin as well.
If there's time later on, there's a little YouTube video that I want to show you guys, which is a brilliant closing point to everything that we've been talking about. So a couple of things about the piece I'm going to show. Okay, I said I get somebody who comes and says, will you make a piece? I want you to make blah, 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 this and this and this, and 5 speakers and 3D and whatever. And so that's okay. That's then, as it were, the orchestra that I have to write for. And then everyone has the blank page syndrome, right? When you have to make something. And knowing the technology that you're writing for doesn't help. People think it helps, but it doesn't. It shouldn't. If it helps, then you're doing something really wrong, I think. And part of the motivation of everything that I'm talking about. I mean, of course, technology can be, you know, if you're writing a piece to expose a technology, then okay, maybe that technology can be, but really, I think the main point that I've been trying to get across all evening is why we need to be more self-conscious of what it is that we're doing. And this was what it was, is really I was just kind of screwing around on Wikipedia, looking at articles. You know, when I'm bored, I read Wikipedia, which is a really stupid thing to do, but I don't know, it's one of those things.
Yeah, back in my childhood it was actual encyclopedias.
I'm
I'm old enough to have that.
Yeah, we spent all the years working
Yeah,
with
like-
Britannica, and indeed, I used to flip through those just random articles, and that's what Wikipedia is great for. But I mean, you know, there's a lot of, you know, disinformation and non-information and things that are just, you know, not useless. But it's really easy to read. So, but I've got a real fetish for late medieval art. Not because I generally like medieval art, but because what it is about, the basis of it I really hate, and that is religion and the power of the church over creative force. What I love about medieval art is going and looking for exceptions. So artists that were somehow able to express something that the church didn't want them to express, right? Okay, I see that as really a metaphor for where our art is in danger of going, and you know, it's one of these things. So looking, just flipping through those kind of, you know, looking at pictures that I liked and reading about things that I liked, I came across the Northern Mannerists, who were, you know, at the same time they were late for the Renaissance. The Renaissance in Italy was kind of, you know, at its high point, it passed its high point, it jumped the shark, as it were, already, and was going into absurd areas. But the Northern Mannerists in Holland and Antwerp and stuff like that were doing some really cool things. And the greatest thing that I thought that I read about them was that their primary concern was a self-consciousness of what they were doing and why they were doing it. And they took the Renaissance hierarchy and they saw it as, you know, that is really utterly important that we have this hierarchy. So there are things like, if I can just show an example. These are, hang on. Okay, these are two paintings by the same guy, done roughly at the same time. Now, which of these do you think is higher in a hierarchy, of art? Or the Northern Mannerist? Sorry?
In that time?
In that time, yeah.
I think right.
So, okay, who says the right one? So I want to go through this because I think it's an important introduction to my piece, because these, you will go through the same thought process that I went through in my piece. And how many people say the left one? Okay. So just a couple of people, why the right one? Why is that higher in a hierarchy? In other words, why does it have more value?
I don't know, because it's less new.
I know. It's really, we're all looking at this, even I look at this through my 20th century eyes, right?
Well, the right one is depicting a successful man,
Yeah.
and the left one is depicting some sort of
Cultus of love.
But the left one is, I think, more artistic, and the right one is I want a painting of myself, and that's it.
Recognition.
Yeah.
But he does want to
But the
show his
commission
wealth.
version.
Right, so.
But the right one is also painting something that is real.
Yes, that is the key. That is absolutely the key. Paintings of things that were real were much lower in the hierarchy than paintings that expressed ideas. So we, with our overstimulated image society, right? You can't walk 10 seconds without seeing an image, okay? In that time, that didn't exist, right? It was only the extremely rich who would ever have seen anything like this, exclusive and scientific. But this, we look at this and we think, my God, that's ghastly. It's a baby's head, a man's shoulders, perfectly circular breasts, and look at her feet.
Hobbit.
Okay. One of my other favorite paintings from this period is Jean Fouquet. I don't have it here, but it's a painting of the Madonna, and it's disgusting because she's got gray skin. She's got the same kind of like these perfectly round breasts, and her body is just totally unnatural. You look at it and you're like, oh, it's beautiful, but it's not the body, it's not the depiction, but all the proportions are mathematically absolutely precise. And so what he's painting here is not anything real. This could not exist in reality, right? That's why this belongs higher in a hierarchy. Yeah, I know it's really hard for us to understand,
Have you
right?
ever been to Amsterdam?
Point taken. Well, come on, no,
So he
look at the
says.
size of my head. Okay, it's just not possible. It's like the Barbie doll, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. No human could possibly be shaped like that. But this of course is.
Yeah, there is one. Somebody actually shaped and worked out after Barbie.
Oh yeah. There's also that French artist that worked on did kind of the same thing.
Really?
Yeah, shaped her face like gave herself a cat's mouth.
Well,
Oh yeah, but not the Barbie. Okay, yeah.
No, not the Barbie, but the same kind of thing.
Yeah,
but let's say nobody can naturally be formed that way.
No.
Yeah. But anyways, the reason why that's insignificant, or of much less significance than this, is because that's a real person that existed, and it's a depiction of the material world. There's nothing in this painting that hints at any kind of higher ideal or higher thing than things that we can touch and feel. So this is what inspired me about the Northern Mannerists, that one artist separated by just a couple of years, could paint both of these things. And now, the other thing absolutely to remember, this has nothing to do with economy, okay? He probably made a pile of money painting that picture, and maybe nothing painting this, okay? But that's not what it's about. It's about which did he, as an artist, think was the more important thing to do. And he knew for himself, this was the important thing to paint because this was something that is an ideal, it is not real, okay? And lots of other things, it has to do with a figure from mythology. That was a very important thing to them. So, okay, enough of my introduction to the piece. That was, I think, everything I wanted to say about that. Oh, and there were some. There were a couple of other things I wanted to say. Mannerist was a derogatory term, just like jazz was a derogatory term, right? You know what jazz is, eh?
Yeah.
Jazz is sperm. We call it jizz now in English, but jazz, they called it jazz music because it was a dirty word. And now we talk about jazz. I love listening to my mom talk about jazz music. So I like that too because that's what's so cool about jazz, right? Is that people thought, oh, this is crap, this is worthless, and it was the word that they decided to use for the art form was exactly the thing that was derogatory. And like in jazz, friendly competition is encouraged, just like my live coding competition. Right? Friendly competition, that was a mannerist thing to do, was they would show their paintings to each other and say, oh, look how I did this, and the other would say, oh no, look how I did this. I think that's cool for artists to do. And they misappropriated quotation, which I also love. So they would take something that was maybe going on at the time. One of the great mannerists was Arcambello, who would paint the Pope as a bowl of fruit and stuff like that. Quotation. And that reminds me of like John Zorn and Joan Oswald, like two really great composers from our time. And a couple of technical things that I took from the Mannerists. just like in that painting on the left, she could not be standing there like that. If she stood there like that with those feet and those proportions, she would fall over, just like a Barbie doll, right? I thought that was interesting. A collapsed perspective was something they did, and I tried to incorporate that into this work as well. Collapsed perspective meaning it's just, you see that there's perspective, that there's depth, but you know it's wrong. Okay, so they would fake depth perspective. Irrational settings, and this, the surrealists, right? Dali and stuff like that were hugely inspired by the Mannerists. And the last thing was theatrical lighting effects. So light in spots that were just not natural. That was another thing that they did and I thought was really cool, and I tried to imitate in this piece. So all reasons why, and once again, I don't think this is supposed to be a great piece. I'm not presenting it because I think it's great, but I think everything I do is great. And you should all think the same thing about the things you think. You shouldn't make anything unless you think it's great, but I don't care if you think it's great or not. I'm not presenting it here because I want you guys, because I'm being egotistical. I'm presenting it here because it's a direct result of something that I thought about, that I wanted to talk about with the sounding screen.
Sorry, can I ask one thing? Did you also use the techniques in making the music?
I let them inspire me, but I didn't take them over directly.
Yeah. And because you use a lot of speakers, is this also to do with the
This is purely to do with the opdrachtgever, who wanted a 5.1 composition with 3D video. Unfortunately, I don't have the 3D version with me, otherwise you'd all have to wear the glasses.
Any question?
Yeah.
This is purely to be sure it's still recording and streaming. Is it okay?
Yeah, I got
Okay.
permission.
Cool.
I asked
Because
Okay, just checking.
yeah, I mean, officially this isn't the premiere. In fact, you might have to change the text on the website. It's
Okay.
a preview.
Okay.
Yeah, because he has reserved the right, of course, because he paid for it.
Yeah.
To have
Maybe just
have
copy
the
paste
premiere.
your text. Is it?
Yeah, we can.
No, you added some text at the bottom that said premiere.
right now?
Okay. We'll change it.
You can change it with your iPhone while the video's playing.
My
Yeah.
iPhone skills are bad.
No, I'll do it later.
Okay, lights off. Because I want to watch it too. It's called Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia. I leave it back now to the sound waves. End the evening however they wish. Or if there are any questions about it.
First I suggest to move back into sort of circle.
Yeah, I was going to suggest the same.
You were talking about painting becoming a high art form or number one in the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And you're talking about how you could do that for electronic art also. So I was wondering, how did they do it? How did they paint it?
Yeah, exactly.
By establishing a hierarchy and sticking to it and fighting for it and proving, for instance, Da Vinci said painting is much more difficult. Painting, this was before the hierarchy was formalized, but he said painting an image of a person is much more difficult than making a statue of a person, which at that time was considered a much more difficult art to do because of the value, of course, of a big piece of marble, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, because painting, it's much more difficult in painting, and it's difficult to do, and it's also has greater effect in a painting to capture the things that you cannot capture with material. So he said, he was arguing that the essences of people are easier to capture with painting and much more difficult for a painter to do than to make a statue. Because statue is just imitating, remember he's talking in the 15th century, but a statue is just imitating material. The material is earthly, it's base, and you know, the things, the essences of people are not contained in what they look like, or the essences of people are contained in, you know, in them being alive.
What I'm sort of struggling to define in my head is that now we're talking about electronic arts, and which is so much more bigger than just a specific, like, just say painting versus sculpture, whereas in electronic arts you can include
Maybe
sculpture.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, like, how can you, it seems like here the importance is the electronics or the digitalization, or what are we exactly trying to emphasize, sort of?
Yeah.
If we were to hire people to hire.
Yeah, it's based on,
Yeah,
because
it's not,
yeah.
because,
That's a really good question, yeah.
I
But
think
also
we
there's-
rather talk higher keys instead of
yeah.
Sorry, that higher,
higher,
higher modes of electronic art, you mean?
Yeah. Also, there's, and then before, there's one thing that, I mean, okay, this is could be my very ignorance, but it seems to me that this way we fight, is that the word? That the way you can fight for your own discipline, sort of say, in painting is by sort of putting down the other, and I don't really like how to do.
Yeah.
So how can you achieve an equal balance and also respecting the other disciplines in such a large field?
Yeah, no, these are really good questions. First of all, I have to clarify certain confusion. When Da Vinci was fighting for the superiority of painting, first of all, painting was seen as an inferior art, so painting was the underdog already, okay?
Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily about him putting down another art, it was him explaining that, no, this art is actually better than anybody thinks, and it can become something much greater than everybody thinks. The other thing is the hierarchy of genres that I'm talking about is not about painting and other arts. It was within painting, but of course other genres, other art forms also adopted a hierarchy. For instance, in literature, the epic poem was considered the best because it was the hardest to do, and it was about important subjects.
So in this case, I'm just speaking from your words.
Yeah.
You're using the word hardest, the most difficult to do. So there's again, you're going to do effort. And if you're trying to put back the electronic arts, the main common thing about it is that it's electronic, whatever, or use, and then how do you put the effort? That's pretty difficult.
That's difficult.
And then where is what's the word that will be the equivalent of hard, difficult, or? You know, I mean,
I don't have an answer to that. That's a very, very difficult thing to define.
Is it more about artistic value than about how hard it is?
Yeah.
Well, artistic value for who?
Yeah, artistic value is artistic value is created by when people think about the efforts the artist is putting. And more in general, it's also about the experience of the work.
Yeah, because I don't really think that most people see or hear effort, but they just see or hear the result. They see a picture or a movie or a soundscape or composition or whatever, dance piece. I don't think they are really.
But that changes when it's live situations and the whole occasion. The occasion has the effort in it. That's the difference I can do.
Occasion is not involved in the effort. Hang on, before we go too far with this discussion, I have to clarify something. Mannerists didn't care at all about audience, and I don't think we should either. I'm being very blunt now. I don't think I really believe that. But
okay, but what was the reason that you wanted to say that, like that people shouldn't care about that?
Well, because the point was just raised that people who see a work of art don't necessarily see the effort or stuff like that. And the Mannerists were defining their hierarchy not for the benefit of the audience, but for the benefit of themselves as creators of things.
But who are we, I mean, if you have no audience, it's really cool to make it for yourself, but I mean, I like to entertain people also.
Yeah, and it
And
still
it's
sounds
just
like
that people
Manners.
thinking, you know.
It
Yeah,
still
it's
sounds like
obvious.
Manners did it for their own group, not for them as individuals, or it's not like that.
I don't think, I mean, I'm no art historian, this is all stuff I've read, but I personally, there are Mannerist documents from painters who talked about these things, and I've read some of those, so I know some of the things that they explicitly talked about. And, I mean, I think the thing that really drew me to the Mannerists was they defined their style themselves, for themselves, and an audience came later and understood what was going on and learned to appreciate it. And so it's something that I also believe myself. If I make the things that I think are really great, then I don't care if nobody likes it. Because either they're not me, which is a good thing, right? Or they don't see the same thing in that piece that I see in that piece. So
Yeah, sure, but there's still always an audience. When you look at like music technology concerts, you've got all the music technology people come to.
but they're not. That's not the audience I'm talking about.
Okay.
The electro-technology students and other makers that come, those aren't audience.
Okay, you don't see those.
I don't see that as audience. I see that as co-creators,
Yeah.
collaborators. I see them as people in the same guild.
No, but this is what I was wondering about. Do you see them as group, or do you see them as individuals?
I don't know. I don't want to make that claim. I don't see groups. I'm not a socialist. I'm not PVD. I don't see people as groups. I see them as individuals.
But when you talk about the Mannerists or the
Yeah, of course they're a group, but not in the sense of group versus individuals.
Mhm.
They're an assembly of individuals who have affinity with one another.
Did they get the name later? And maybe they were the group.
Good point. No, I don't think so. I think they got. I remember reading a document by an art critic in the 16th century who talked about that revolting Mannerist style. So
Okay.
it was quite literally what I said about jazz. It was the same thing.
Yeah.
White people called black music jazz because they thought it was crap.
For some reason, I have to think that whole sort of like an emancipation of them taking their own art really seriously, and so developing this sort of really this hierarchy in which they place themselves, of course, high up because it's important.
No. Careful. They did not place themselves higher up. They placed, that's totally different. I regret ever bringing up Da Vinci because now we're getting things confused because of course he wasn't really a Mannerist. He dealt with the problem of hierarchy in art, but because you're getting a couple of things confused. The Mannerists didn't see themselves as better than other artists, okay? That was totally a Da Vinci thing. Important. The Mannerists saw particular works that they made as being more important
Than the other works that they made.
Yeah.
other works that they made.
Yeah.
That's the key point.
Yeah.
So I don't think electronic artists are necessarily better than any other kind of artist.
No, you're just-
No, but that wasn't really what I was going for. What I was more thinking about, like this sort of something related, but this sort of remix culture that is developing and has been developing for so many years.
It's been around since the early 80s.
Yeah, I know. But in recent years, I'm seeing more and more of people. Like at first, I got like a lot of slack and a lot of things like, okay, remixing isn't real art. Remixing is just stealing from people and putting a little beat under it, and that's it. And right now, I'm seeing these really powerful messages of that remixing is the only important electronic art, and there's this whole sort of
Yeah.
revitalizing of the idea of remixing as being like the top hierarchy of what should be happening. Like you should be building on the shoulders of others. You shouldn't be thinking that you are like this creative mastermind, and because even if you think you are, you're still remixing, but just not explicit.
Umberto Eco called that the rebirth of the Middle Ages.
Yeah, but
The death of humanism.
yeah, but it's kind of interesting, like in a sort of hierarchy thing that.
Yeah, is remixing an electronic art? Should we include that in the electronic arts? I mean, in Jacqueline Oskamp's definition, it's absolutely an electronic art.
Yeah, but in other definition, you could say that it's always been there.
It's more general.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, the most important remix work of art ever made was done in 1986. I think I talked about this in class many times. Did anyone know what that was?
Yeah, was it the thing by Polanski? Or
No.
not? Not that one.
No, that is a good. That's a good one though, but that's 1972. But that's not really a remix. That
No,
is
that's true.
no. The really literal remix is Plunderphonics, John Oswald, 1986, masterpiece, absolute masterpiece of work. Because everything about it, every tiny little detail, was thoroughly thought out, and from the media attention it got, from the lawsuits he had to put up with, everything was completely choreographed by John Oswald. And in that sense, that is the pinnacle of remix.
But
Everything after that pales.
it was created with that idea in mind, though.
Yeah.
That idea that this is something you don't do, and I'm interested in
Exactly, it's a self-conscious piece of work. That's
Whereas
what is significant.
remixing now is, it's part of the culture.
It's banality.
There's like it's banal, and it's
Yeah.
just like a substrate
Yeah.
that people work on top of.
Yeah, it's like decorum, right?
And what I'm more like interested in is that whole process, that it, after years of taking lawsuits and crap and all that kind of shit, that a group of people is really making a stance now and saying, no, this isn't, there shouldn't be lawsuits, there shouldn't be this, and there shouldn't be, this is a high form of art. That is, this is the way to go forward, and it's being presented in that way. Almost like, okay, this is what people should be doing if you want to advance the arts.
And also Creative Commons, of course,
Yeah.
works with this also.
Yeah,
It gives you the chance to at least make a choice in this.
Yeah, one of the things that I think sadly does not get discussed in this respect is the idea of the integrity of originality, which gets thrown out of the window in discussions of remixing. So, I mean, and this is one of the things that John Oswald really highlighted, right? Because the Michael Jackson he feminized Michael Jackson, which is, that in terms of decorum, and that's why Michael Jackson sued the shit out of him, right? Because he was making the joke that everybody made, right? Except nobody was making it in some kind of high art form. And
nobody made it in his face.
yeah, he stuck it in his face like that, right? And all the cracks about cosmetic surgery and stuff like that were all related to the rip-off of Michael Jackson. So that's a case where I think he can play the artistic merit thing. One thing where I think you might not be able to pull the artistic merit argument is Radiohead ripping off Paul Lansky. Because I don't know, because I talked to Paul Lansky about this, and he was ecstatic. He loved it that Radiohead had done it, so there was no problem there. But what had Radiohead done? One of the guys, the guitar player, the brains behind he found this old LP of 1970s electronic music, and he listened to it, and he ripped like the first, something really early in the composition, and looped it, and said, oh, this is going to be great, this is going to be a hit. And totally did not asked Paul Lansky if he liked the idea or not. And the record company, Paul Lansky himself told me this, so it must be true, but Paul Lansky said that the record company said, hey, we really like this, maybe this will be a single. And that sound is really cool, how'd you make that? Oh, I got it off this old LP. And of course the record executives think it's right? Like, oh, we better ask if this is okay. And of course Paul Lansky just loved the idea. But, okay, think about the principle of it. He ripped something off of, this is kind of what I like about it, of course, because he ripped it off of something that is elitist art, right, early 70s computer music, which was, in a sense, a rip-off of even more elitist art, right, because it was inspired by the Tristan chord of Wagner, right, so which is not, I don't think you could really call that a rip-off, because then you can call, you know,
everything's a rip-off.
yeah, because I'm not sure that's not a rip-off. What Paul Lansky did is not a rip-off in the same category as what Radiohead did with them. That is a much
More
different
inspiration. Maybe there's like
No,
rip-off
what Paul
inspiration
Lansky was
still.
doing, was he was building on a tradition, right? Because the Tristan chord is the source of all 20th century composition, music composition. I mean, in terms of that in that genre of musical composition. That is where the entire 20th century music started, because all of a sudden Wagner says, listen to this chord, it can't go anywhere. Right? Yeah, but that's what's so brilliant about that chord, is he said, you know what, I'm going to put this chord in this piece, and this chord cannot go anywhere. Whereas everything in the musical tradition up to that point said, no, if you play a chord, it's got to go somewhere. You can't just let it hang like that. That's just not done, right? And Wagner was the guy who said, no. Right. Okay, and that's what, I mean, Paul Lansky was by quoting that, he was building on that tradition with inside an electronic music context. I don't think, I think it's arguable whether Radiohead was doing that or not, because it was not literally an homage on Paul Lansky or something like that. I'm not even sure that the guitar player knew who Paul Lansky was, but he just found this album of obscure electronic music in a secondhand shop somewhere.
The fun thing about YouTube and that kind of stuff now is that people look the shit up. You've got the sites about what is sampled and sample.com and and
that is actually interesting.
You got 15-year-old dudes who know who Paul Lansky is, and I find that very cool.
And that's what Paul Lansky said himself. He said, I am eternally thankful to Radiohead for having done this, because he said it brought what was really an obscure piece to a wide audience, and that was Paul Lansky's goal in life.
Yeah, but if they had done that 10 years, if this happened like 10 years ago, without the internet involved, would it have been, would it have had the same impact?
It was like 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, okay, sure. What's 20 years ago?
Internet.
Yeah, internet, but I'm talking about Radiohead, Paul Lansky thing.
Well, when was that? That was 1990 something, right?
Yeah.
When that album came
Or
out.
2001,
Okay.
something like that.
Because I mean, I was still playing rock and roll when Radiohead had their first hit. So they're even older than me.
Why are we still listening?
They're in wheelchairs.
Yeah.
I think, you know, the whole thing with the remixing, when it started, it was the whole thing about we take something old and put it in a new jacket, right? Or a lot of stuff was like this.
I'm uncomfortable talking about this because the extent of my knowledge of that particular way of making music is very limited. I know about a couple of important works in that sense, but to be honest, I can't. You know, all I know about remixing now is what I hear from students, because I just I don't have TV at home.
Something different then.
Uh-huh.
About the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Suppose there would be a hierarchy in that sense of electronic music. And actually, now that I think of it, I'm kind of curious about the definition of the mannerists a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that, okay, some works are more important than others, but what are exactly the criteria? Why
Excellent question, absolutely excellent question. Should I beam that? I've got that with me. Because that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about, was they had a very specific hierarchy. So the reasons behind it, I have to be very specific about what history painting is. It's not just what that literally means, like painting things from history, but it has to do with great moments in history, and that includes, for instance, mythology. Okay, so that was, my piece was called Cassiopeia, and the whole piece is based on the myth of Cassiopeia.
So you're making a very, very important piece now.
Sorry,
You have been making a very important piece now.
well, yeah, that was the thing I wanted. Literally, yeah, I wanted to make the most important piece on this hierarchy, and I went through everything that they wrote about this hierarchy. And I try to adopt everything that they wrote. Now, I don't think at all that this is my best work, but it's, I felt that I don't even feel like it's an important work for electronic art in that sense, because I don't think this hierarchy has really any meaning to somebody living in the 21st century. This hierarchy was based on people living in the early 16th century.
It's pretty cool, actually. Their highest point in the ranking is like history, and that you are actually quoting their current as history.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, but remember what I just said. They don't mean history in the way that we mean history. History for them included things that didn't happen. So the biggest myth of all the Bible, right, is they considered that painting scenes from the Bible, of course, they didn't happen. They were myths.
They thought that happened. So for them it was an history.
No,
I think common people throughout the whole history of the church. I can illustrate this with a famous quotation. I didn't come up with this. If the Pope wakes up one morning and says, "I don't believe in God," you know he's gone insane. If he wakes up in the morning and he says, "I believe in God," you know he's lying. If he wakes up in the morning and he says, "Sometimes I wonder about the existence of God," then you know he's telling the truth. So what that means is, of course, all the intellectuals at that time understood that it was mythology. This whole...
Did they? Because they also thought the earth was flat.
No, they did not. Nobody ever in the history of the world thought the world was flat. Absolutely not.
Really?
Common peasants, maybe, but absolutely not. There was nowhere, and I know this because I took an astronomy course and we had a detailed discussion about exactly this.
Because this is what they teach us at school.
Yeah,
you didn't get it wrong.
it's a myth that was like that. And you know what it is, as a matter of fact? It's a Renaissance myth that they spread around to discredit medieval scholarship. Because what is the one thing that the Renaissance wanted to destroy was any kind of positive notion of what the medieval period was like. I would recommend anybody to read the book by Terry Jones called Medieval Lives. It's really enlightening because it really tells you about how the medieval period is not all that different from this period, and that the Renaissance, we think of it as rebirth, great culture and stuff like that, but there was a lot of stuff in the medieval period that was extremely positive. Sorry, I went off.
So, what are the positive things about the medieval period? Because it seems like we're going back into one, and I would like some silver linings.
Yeah, the assertion of individual freedom.
In the medieval period?
In the medieval period, among intellectuals. That is something that
Among
people...
intellectuals.
But among intellectuals and educated. So, I mean, remember, there were not very many educated people at that time. So, I think we can count ourselves as the educated elite. And I think the educated elite is much larger now than it ever has been in the history of the world. However, if you go to certain parts of America and Canada, you realize what it means when Umberto Eco says that we're going back into a medieval period. It's because, well, the average lifespan in Canada differs 5 years between wealthy people and poor people. So poor people die 5 years earlier. They project that in the next 20 years, that is going to increase to 15 to 20 years. So think of that for a second. In one of the most well-developed countries in the world, I mean, this has nothing to do, I mean, the average oldest age of poor people is still higher than it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago. But the difference between wealthy and poor in terms of lifespan is growing. And I mean, this has everything to do with the idiot tax, right? McDonald's and cigarettes and alcohol. In Canada, in any case, I don't know if it's the same here.
Well, in the States, health insurance all the time.
Sorry?
In the States, it's health insurance.
Yeah, the States is a different situation, of course, than Canada, a much different situation. Although, in fact, I would bet that that increase is going to happen even faster in the States. Because what they say, the essential difference between the States and Canada is that if you're healthy, you better be in Canada for the health system. But if you're sick, it's much better to be in the States. If you're sick and rich, sorry. Anyways, sorry, we're getting way off track. But that's the other thing I'd recommend is there's an article by Umberto Eco called, I think, Entering the New Middle Ages or something like that. It's just a short article. It's probably online somewhere. I'd recommend you read that because he talks about exactly that. He asks the question, are we entering a new medieval period? I would argue no, but I would, based on what he wrote in there and based on my own feeling about things, but what I would argue is that we are. Let me give you an example. The guy from Oracle. Did you hear what he bought a couple of weeks ago? He bought one of the Hawaiian Islands. Okay, so when one man has the power to buy an entire island in an extremely wealthy area, I mean, apparently it costs like $90 million or something like that. One guy has that much money, cash lying around to buy an island where people live. It's not a deserted island somewhere. It's like a place where people live with cities and stuff like that. Cool. So that's cool for him, right? But and another indication that I think we're going into kind of a new medieval period is I know somebody back in Canada who's mega rich. I don't know how rich I didn't know how rich he was, but we were talking about it one time, and he said, well, my great-great-grandchildren, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren will never have to work. So if that's an indication of a big divide, and he's not even like the richest guy.
I mean, if you just live like normally, you don't have to be that rich.
Well, that's the other thing too, of course.
Yeah.
But as the divide between rich and poor gets bigger and bigger, which in Canada it's shocking because the poorest have always stayed the poorest, right? Then that is mostly the native population. But the richer have gotten so outrageously, sickeningly rich in the past 20 years. It's a huge change. And the gap between rich and poor is bigger than it has ever been in Canada. And in the past 10 years alone, it's like, I don't know, 10 times or something like that. So that is one thing that I think is really concerning in terms of this idea of returning to the Middle Ages. And I think the other thing about returning to the Middle Ages was in the Middle Ages you have the power of the church, and I think in our time it's going to be the power of the corporate sounds so cheesy. It sounds like RoboCop when I say that.
Well, the power of economic validity.
Yeah, the power of
Saying like
economics.
this,
Yeah,
something is valid if it's economically.
the economic value of things will take
It's
precedence
this
over
obsession with
intrinsic
constant
value.
growth, right? And I mean, that-
Obsession with growth definitely is.
as long as it contributes to growth,
Yeah.
then anything can be validated.
Yeah, and that I think will become a religion. And I think technology has a very strong role. Current developments in technology, which is really upsetting about the direction that Apple is going. I'm going to reveal a big secret to you guys that very few people know about.
And then 7 million.
And 7 million.
The Martians will know that.
Although I can keep this secret because nobody knows. But I have a Facebook account. Now, nobody of you will ever find it because I use a fake name. But I've been kind of observing Facebook and
I
realizing.
suggest you eventually.
Oh yeah, no, Facebook, it's a drug. How many of you are on Facebook? How often do you check your Facebook?
Daily.
I'm telling you, take one step back from your life and look at how you're using Facebook, and then think about the chimpanzees with the electrodes in their hand. And ask yourselves how different you are from those chimpanzees. The difference is the electrodes are on the table in front of you. And I find that so fascinating to watch on Facebook. Is how, I'm sorry, because I've friended, I mean, maybe you can find me this way by friending friends of mine, if you can find friends of mine. Because I've been watching, I have very close friends that are on Facebook, and I just kind of like to, see, and I see how different they are on Facebook.
But this is
what
also
they are
a
in
bit
real
scary
life.
that you do it.
Sorry? This is scary. I think my friends would be really upset if they knew that I'm saying that. But I'm pretty sure they're not part of the 7 million.
But it's quite interesting. I Facebook actually found a way to get even you involved.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm not.
You are actually thinking that you are watching them. I am not ignorant of the irony of what it is that I'm doing. Believe me, I'm not ignorant because I pay very close attention to the advertisements that pop up. Do you guys know the advertisements that pop up? Facebook is checking your email now as well, right? I mean,
I don't know. I reset my IP every now and then, my IP number. So, and I don't no cookies. I would guess that they know certain things, that there is somebody in my town that keeps resetting their cookies and their IP. I think they probably know that about me, but I don't think they know all that much. I mean, they know everything about all my friends, but
That tells a lot about you.
They know much more than you think.
But and again, my friends doesn't tell
That'll be
anything about
probably
you.
on some sort of list right now.
oh yeah, I'm probably. Well, no, I don't publish that.
I don't know. I think
That's the way to do
The Mannerist got probably into discussion or
Oh, yeah,
they
probably
came
discussion.
debated and they came up with this list. How did this pan out for them? Because
Well, the northern, I mean, really, I should clarify something. It's really, I kind of shift between the northern Mannerists and the Mannerists in general. The Mannerists were, of course, an Italian group, but it's really the northern Mannerists that I really like. And the reason I really like them is, I'll give you an example of one of my favorite paintings in the whole world. Maybe even two of them. So if you know this painting and you know what it's about, don't say anything. Okay? In what genre, in what part in the hierarchy does this fall? And let's remind ourselves of the hierarchy. Is it a history painting, a portrait painting, a genre painting, a landscape, animal painting, or a still life?
What is genre again?
Genre is scenes from daily life.
Say genre.
Genre?
History.
Yeah.
Why would it be a history?
But I don't know what history.
Why would it be history?
Does it? Some way.
Remember,
That's history.
they
They
call
have,
it history
mythology.
paintings, but they're not talking about history.
No, it is
They include history. History makes very important things. So you know it already, eh?
Okay.
You know it already?
No, but I see a leg in the water.
Okay, that should be the hint.
That's weird.
That is the hint. That is.
Oh wow.
Yeah, you
Wow.
discovered it. So who is this?
It's Titus Nicker or what?
Jesus. Exactly.
Ah,
It's
yes.
Oh, so he squashed a couple of legs in the corner, he upgraded, it would have been a low class piece. But this is why I love the Northern Mannerists, because they were very clever about this kind of stuff. And Raphael was not being cynical when he painted Icarus small like that, because he was being, and this is why a hierarchy of arts is so interesting to have, is because it forces you to think about what it is exactly that you're saying. Because not only there are a couple of really important things here. Let me see if I can find it. So it's kind of hard to see. So okay, a couple of things. Where's this guy looking? He's looking at the ground. Where's this guy looking? He's looking up at the sky. Who's looking at Icarus?
No, I don't know.
Did anybody actually notice Icarus?
Well, there's a guy sitting at the side of the water or something.
Yeah, he's fishing.
Yeah, he's looking like this.
He's looking between his legs at the fish that he's pulling out of the water. And this is something, and this is why I love this painting so much. I gotta show you this. Sorry, I can get really excited about these kind of things. Because Bruegel did this in a lot of paintings. I tried to explain this to somebody once and they didn't believe me. They said, no, it's just an accident. I'm like, no, you knew about this. Look at this bird. Can you just barely make out that bird?
Yeah.
He's as big as Icarus.
What?
Yeah. Now you'd say to yourself, okay, yeah, but that's because he's closer. But he didn't paint that like that by accident. He is saying, listen, these high history mythology guys, they're all a load of shit. Birds are more important than that. He is saying that, and I know that because he says that in so many of his paintings. He always has paintings where there's a bird in it. And whenever you see a bird in one of his paintings, you have to look at the stuff around it and see what is the bird bigger than. And this sounds like a joke. Yeah, no, but this is what's great about this painting, right? It's because here's a Northern Mannerist saying to the hierarchy,
Yeah.
right? Brilliant, because Bruegel, what did he want to paint? He wanted to paint peasants, he wanted to paint landscapes, right? But the group of painters around him were saying, no, you've got to paint mythology, you've got to paint big subjects. And there we go, that's him painting a big subject. I have actually...
Yeah, let's work it out.
Yeah. Sorry, but I hope I could kind of, with my last burst of energy, inspire some thinking about this.
Pick one up and throw it away.
It's kind of interesting to see that even the Mannerists who had such a hierarchy.
Well, but the Northern Mannerists specifically strove for self-consciousness in their work. And if any of you get a chance to read a book by John Ralston Saul, he's a Canadian philosopher, and he wrote a book called The Unconscious Civilization, where he talks about exactly this problem, about how we're all becoming unconscious of the things that we're doing. And that is another aspect of going back to the Middle Ages, I find, is that we're losing this notion of self-consciousness in our unconscious civilization. And because that's what's so great about that painting, right? Here is somebody who is hyper self-conscious of what it is that he's doing. And that's what I want to be when I make stuff too. And I know when I look at a lot of my work that I wasn't that. And it's one of those things that I'm like, okay, let's get back to being conscious of
We
what
get
we're
there
doing.
slow, right? You can't be there just like that.
No. But it's, you make things and you one of the things is you think, okay, if the audience doesn't like it, then it's shit. and that's something that
Shouldn't throw away.
if I like it, that's important. So if I would have listened to audiences, I think my best pieces would have never been made. Anyways, super big thank you for letting me get up, and thanks for all the interesting discussion. It was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's a circle. It's a circle.
And so,
Thank
you get any notes?
I tried to answer things, but somebody wrote it, so it's like looking refreshed.
I'm going to the bar.